Hi there. So nice to be here. Thank you for having me. Um, so I was asked what started my passion for sustainable tourism. And some people don't even know what sustainable tourism is. So I'll talk about that in a second. But I suppose for me, I feel like everybody needs a purpose in life, and not everyone finds their purpose. And I suppose that I'm lucky that I found one. And mine came relatively early, if I have to try and think about it. I suppose when I was 13 years old, my parents took me to Mexico, and I'm very privileged. I'm very lucky to have been able to travel. My parents really thought that education through travel really opened our eyes to different cultures and to different parts of the world. Anyways, it was my birthday, and I remember having chocolate cake for my birthday and coconut ice cream, which is my favorite. And we were walking back along the beach, and we came across which I thought was a stream, and then it smelled terrible, and I was horrified when I realized that it was raw sewage running down the beach into the ocean. And I I I think I was just a bit stunned. And my father said to me, he said, at this stage, you choose. You can either choose to be part of the problem or part of the solution. And I think that, if my memory serves me correctly, that's the one thing that really stuck with me throughout my life, is that you can choose to be part of the problem or part of the solution. And I loved to travel, and I think so many people love to travel, but we don't often think about the consequences of what our travel does. And if you are privileged enough to travel, you probably don't even consider it. And throughout my career, I've been working in the tourism industry since I was 13. I was a howdy girl at the Calgary Stampede in Canada. I've worked for hotels and destinations. And I guess the one thing I realize is that you have to convince people to come on your journey. Otherwise, there's no value in it for them. So you have to show them the value. And throughout my life, I've realized that travel, even though it sounds so exotic and so amazing, there's impacts. So, for example, did you know that there's 1 in 10 people globally who are employed by the tourism industry? And it contributes something like $8.9 trillion to GDP. And apart from the pandemic and 9/11, it's grown at a rate of 4 to 5% every single year. I think that's a 56-fold increase. But with all this growth, everybody always talks about growth, and growth isn't really the same as yield. And it's not the same as benefits to communities. And so, just as an example of some of the things that have really prompted me in my life to share the information, is the impacts that we have that we don't necessarily know about. So did you know that if you stay in a 3-star hotel, the average water consumption is 350 liters per person per night? But if you stay in a 4-star hotel, that goes up to 800 liters per person per night. And if you stay in a 5-star hotel, that goes up to 1,800 liters of water per person per night. And for sure, that includes things like fountains and washing and all those kinds of things. But when you realize that 1,800 liters of water is sometimes the same amount of water that an entire village uses in a year in places in Southeast Asia, it does, for me, it struck me that, oh my goodness, I cannot believe that I am so entitled that I am doing this without any realization about what it's doing to the communities around me or doing to the natural environment around me. And I think that as the tourism industry continues to grow and develop, just a quick stat, in 1950, I think there was about 25 million international visitors. It's when airlines started to really operate. And by 2019, there was 1.4 billion people who were traveling internationally. And that's not domestically, that's internationally. And that's an awful lot of people. And so the more that the middle classes come up, the more developing nations start to travel, the more impacts we're going to have. And again, we can choose to be part of the problem or part of the solution. So I started working in an NGO in 2000, 1999 and 2000, and we were trying to show the other side of a city. It was called The Other Side, the other map of Toronto, which is a big city in Canada, or The Other Guide, which was a guidebook of the other sides of Toronto. And we were trying to talk about the parks, and we were trying to talk about the communities, and we were trying to talk about the culture and things that weren't just the big attractions in the city. And funnily enough, nobody wanted to talk to us. None of the tourism organizations or the governments wanted to talk to us. And it was only after we got $6 million worth of public relations from all the articles that we had generated, because people were interested about the topic. on our $3,000 marketing budget, that all of a sudden the governments and the tourism board said, hey, this is a really great idea, we should talk about it. And now, 20 years later, lots of people are talking about visiting the other things that aren't the mainstream tourist attractions. And so now I think it's great that it's on everyone's agenda, and climate change is a conversation at dinner tables, but it's still not enough. In 2008, we started myself and some really amazing people started an NGO about climate change in tourism, because we were really concerned about the state of the climate, and that tourism's role in emissions was huge. And we went across the country, again in Canada, talking to organizations and doing conference presentations and writing white papers. And I think we educated a whole bunch of people about the issues, but the NGO folded because the industry just wasn't ready for it. And so I suppose that that really led me to understand that the message has to get out, and you talk to businesses and you talk to governments, but growth is not the same as development. And since most people measure success based on numbers, that's a tough challenge in our world, to realize that it's about benefits. It's not necessarily just about numbers. And it also makes me realize that sometimes the timing has to be right. If someone's not ready to listen to the message, we either need to change our message, or we need to wait for the right time so that people are ready to hear it. And many years later now, it's great. I've been working in this space for a long time, and I see amazing companies, and I hear of amazing opportunities, which I didn't hear before, and that's very heartening. But I also feel, I work as an academic and as a consultant, that I think we tend to forget about things sometimes, and we often talk to the converted. So although I think that sustainable tourism is doing really well and it's really growing, I talk to my friends or family or somebody on the street, and they have no idea what I'm talking about, which then led me to realize that education only goes so far as who we reach. And in the universities, I teach in a business school, sustainability is not integrated into everything. So I'm the squeaky wheel, and I talk about the sustainable development goals or community development within my mainstream marketing classes or any other class I teach. And I feel that we all have that responsibility to bring up these kinds of things. But we're busy and everybody has a life, and we forget about all the things we're supposed to do. So again, I think it's about the timing, and it's about the message. And it also makes me realize that education doesn't really happen, if we're always talking to the converted. So during the pandemic, I thought a lot about this, and I've written lots of articles and lots of books and things like that, and I have a website, and I produce videos, I do anything I possibly can, but I didn't feel that we were really moving the needle. And so during the pandemic, I asked my former supervisor if he would be interested in writing a book. And we thought, yeah, how hard can it be to write a book for the mainstream? Anyways, we did. And every parent will understand this phrase. It's called, Are We There Yet? Traveling More Responsibly with Your Children. One of the reasons we wrote a book for the mainstream rather than for the academic audiences, which we usually do, or business audiences, is that we realized that travel and education starts when you're younger. And if parents have the tools and the skills to be able to make easy choices and make their life easier, and allow their kids to have fun, that means they also have fun. And sometimes we're so overwhelmed as parents, just trying to make the right decision. We actually don't have the information at our fingertips. And I think there's a lot of shaming. When I was pregnant with my daughter, and my daughter was born, I was told that I couldn't take her to Morocco. I planned to take her to Morocco for a while with my partner. And people said, you can't take your daughter to Morocco. That's totally unsafe. It's dirty. It's a developing country. And I thought, why not? Why can't I take her? What's wrong with this? Maybe it's just a perception. And I got a lot of shaming in terms of, maybe you're going to have to buy a minivan and just go to Disneyland. And I thought, I've been really lucky to travel around the world. Why would I not want to expose my daughter to those same kinds of things? And as my daughter's grown up and I've met other parents, many people have said, they were afraid to take their kids out of the house in the beginning, or they never wanted to travel with their kids like they did before because they thought it was going to be too difficult, or it was going to be too expensive to make the right responsible choices. And I just don't think that's true. And so Myself and my co-writer, Richard Butler, who's just this incredible person with all sorts of knowledge and 7 grandchildren who has lots to say. We wrote this book about what really responsible travel is and why we need to travel more sustainably, but also all the positives that can happen for traveling with children. You get through the airport lines quicker. People open their doors to you. Your children learn things that are just outstanding. I mean, I remember when I was in Japan, I was there for work and I brought my daughter, and I think she was 2.5 at the time. And she decided that she wanted to walk across Tokyo train station by herself. And as a parent, I was horrified. There's 30 million people. I don't know. There's many millions of people in Tokyo. And I thought, she can't walk by herself. And then there was part of me that thought, well, how can I always try and get people to change their behavior if I'm not willing to change mine? And so I said, well, you don't have to hold my hand, but you need to walk beside me. Is that okay? She said, yes. And she marched actually across this train station with me beside her, probably looking absolutely horrified and terrified. And she got to the other side of this train station and she said, Mommy, I did it all by myself. And the look of pride on her face was so cute and it was so heartwarming. And it made me realize that we need to give our kids the opportunities to make choices on their own. But it goes a step farther, and we need to give them the tools and the choices to make responsible decisions on their own. So we were in Mexico. It reminded me of my Mexico trip with my dad all those years ago. I was in Mexico with my daughter and we were walking along the street and everybody was saying, oh, señorita, would you like to go swim with the dolphins? And not every, but most 4-year-old girls, dolphins and mermaids, and it's their dream. And she just looked at me with wide eyes. And I said, we'll talk about it and we'll come back. And as we were walking down the street, I said, sweetie, where do you think dolphins live? She said, Mommy, dolphins live in the ocean. And I said, well, where do you think you're going to swim with them if you go swimming with dolphins? She looked at me and I said, well, it'll be in a swimming pool. She said, but Mommy, dolphins live in the ocean. And I said, yeah. I didn't say anything else. And about 20 minutes later, after we had gone to the bank or whatever we were doing, we looped back and this same person came and said, señorita, would you like to swim with dolphins? And she looked at him and she said, that's bad. Dolphins belong in the ocean, not a swimming pool. And again, she made the decision and she realized, and now years later, she's still an animal activist to a certain extent. We came home and she said, I want people to stop swimming with dolphins, Mommy. And by then, this is a year later, she's 5. And I said, well, what do you want to do about it then? And she said, well, I want to call up the people and tell them to not do it. I said, well, that's admirable, but it might not help. What else can you do? And she said, well, I could sell cookies. I said, yes, I could make art. And so we spent a whole weekend making art of her sticker collection in the form of mermaids and dolphins. And she sold them outside our front porch. And every single penny of the money she made from selling cookies and her sticker pictures went to a dolphin rescue organization. And I don't think that money could buy that type of experience of what she decided to do on her own. And that really drove the point home to me that we can have such amazing successes in terms of environmental education if we just provide the right tools. And so that's why we wrote the book about traveling more responsibly with your children, to provide encouragements and tools to parents and grandparents around the world that they could make easy choices and better choices, and they don't have to be the most expensive choices. So I like to fix problems, and I guess that's kind of what made me realize that environmental literacy is such a huge skill. Less than 5% of the population has a university degree. So I am very privileged to be able to work in a university. But with that privilege also comes responsibility, I suppose, like the Spider-Man movie where they said with great power comes great responsibility. And I believe that we need to integrate sustainability decisions into business practices, into government practices, into our own daily practices. And, if 1 in 10 jobs worldwide is created by tourism, and the GDP of most countries is dependent on tourism, we also need to realize that it's not just about a numbers game. A lot of countries, in some countries, up to 80% of the money that comes into a country from tourism leaks right back out of it. That means if somebody spends $1, for example, in a country like Kenya is an example of this, 80 cents of that dollar leaves the country because all the tour operators or the buses or the hotels are owned by foreign companies. And so as travelers, we have an opportunity to make a positive difference. We can stay in locally owned accommodations. We can ask the questions about where our waste is going. Did you know that the average hotel guest creates about 1.5 kilograms of waste per day, and the average cruise ship passenger can create up to 3 kilograms of waste per day? And just to put that into perspective, the average household in North America creates about 3.5 kilograms of waste per week. And so why do we have the luxury of being so hard on our planet and not consider the communities we're visiting when we're traveling? We are there to have a good time, but we also need to make sure we have responsible choices. So yeah, I am super lucky. I love what I do. I always think that there are way more problems to fix than I have time to do. I don't need any more projects, but I always seem to come up with new projects. But I truly believe there's 3 types of people in this world, and there's people who come up with the ideas, there's people who make those ideas a reality, and then there's people who maintain those ideas and improve them. And I don't come up with the ideas. I didn't come up with sustainable tourism. It's been around a long time. The word sustainable development has been around a long time, but I feel like I'm one of those people who can put some of those ideas into practice and make sure that we stop talking about things and we start acting instead. And so that's what I do, and I would love you to come along for the ride. There's websites, there's books, there's all sorts of things, and you know, if you tell one person and they tell one person and we all change one small thing about our life, then tomorrow's going to be better than it was today. Thank you.